Welcome, everyone. It looks like we still have a few people coming in. I want to just say welcome and Jai Jinendra to all of you who are joining us today for the third Shri Parshvanath Presidential Chair in Jain Studies Lecture in Ethical Innovations. We're hosting this today at the University of California, Irvine, and sending out many thanks to all of you who've come in today. My name is Brian Donaldson. I hold the chair in Jain Studies here at UCI in Religious Studies and Philosophy. I want to send a special welcome to my students in medical ethics. And I also want to note the number of interdisciplinary organizations who are co-sponsoring this UCI Humanities event. These organizations include UCI Religious Studies, the Department of Philosophy, Newkirk Center for Science and Society, the Effective Altruism Club, the Center for Knowledge, Technology and Society, UCI Law Center for Land, Environment and Natural Resources, Water UCI, UCI Law Center for Biotechnology and Global Health Policy, UCI Solutions that Scale, the Center for Legal Philosophy, and the Center for Medical Humanities. Thank you all. I think that this collection of centers and programs demonstrates the far-reaching importance of today's topic. I also want to extend some sincere thanks to the UCI School of Humanities Dean, Tyrus Miller, and the communications team, especially the leadership and vision of Annabelle Adams, as well as Michelle Spivey and Mark Kunda in the Department of History, and Dwayne Pack in the Office of Information Technology for his professional skill and his personal support for today's event. And most importantly, I want to warmly welcome any members of the Jain community here in Southern California, around the country and the world who are joining us today. Today's lecture, as well as last year's lectures on alternatives to animal testing, highlighting human organ chip technology and non-animal toxicity testing, is only possible because of your philanthropic vision. Finally, today's lecture is being recorded and registered attendees will receive a link for the video in the next few days. I also would like to invite all of you to an upcoming event. This is the inaugural Jain Studies lecture on December 1st, featuring Dr. Anne Vallely. The lecture is Non-Ordinary States of Consciousness and Religion, Reflections on the Jain Tradition, which will be co-sponsored by the School of Humanities and the UCI Center for Cannabis Studies, and also a cross-institutional partnership with Loyola Marymount University's program in Yoga Studies and Theological Studies. Dwayne, if you're able and you could drop that registration link for Dr. Vallely's lecture in the chat, that would be great. And all of you are really welcome to join for this. Now I'd like to offer just a few words of introduction on this lecture series. Jainism is a religious tradition and a philosophical system that is rooted in India, whose texts and practices are perhaps more focused on the ethics of life and death than any other tradition in the world. The music that you heard playing as you joined today is called the Namakar Mantra, a Jain homage to 5 groups of inspiring persons who restrained their thoughts, speech, and bodily actions so as not to harm their own self or other living beings through violent actions. Jainism posits a core life force in every living being, whether that be human, animal, insect, or microbe. Consequently, the Jain tradition advocates the practice of nonviolence, or ahimsa, in order to minimize harm to all life forms. This sentiment is expressed in the oldest surviving Jain text dated to the 5th or 6th century BCE, which states the following: that all breathing, existing, living, sentient beings should not be slain, nor treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. This is the pure, unchangeable, eternal law. This powerful exhortation not to harm is expressed in the lives of Jain monks and nuns who strive to avoid violence to all beings in as many ways as humanly possible, giving up family and professional lives in order to refrain from the accumulation of material goods and wealth that also cause harm. Jain mendicants don't wear shoes nor use mechanized transportation. They often wear mouth shields to prevent inhaling microorganisms, eat simple vegetarian food prepared by others, use a broom to sweep the ground clear of insects when walking, sitting, or lying down, among many other iconic practices. However, the vast majority of Jains around the world are not monks and nuns, but they are lay Jains who strive to live out this commitment to nonviolence in the context of their work, family, and community lives. Relevant to today's lecture, Jainism from its earliest texts recognized the harms of food production, acknowledging that to eat anything always has a cost to living beings and on oneself. For these reasons, Jains came to practice vegetarianism as a logical extension of their metaphysical commitments, and the extensive textual tradition encourages the avoidance of meat, eggs, honey, fermented foods, and root vegetables, whose production involves excessive injury to living beings. In the last 3 decades, as global Jains have become more aware of the harms of industrial dairy production, many have adopted or moved toward a dairy-free or vegan diet, recognizing the harms to living beings, to the environment, and in issues of environmental justice that are inherent in the dairy industry. On that note, I'd like to invite Dr. Jankana Jeena Shah to offer a few opening remarks on behalf of the US Jain community. Dr. Shah is the chair of the Ahimsak Eco-Vegan community of the Federation of Jains in North America. She's board certified in preventative and family medicine with experience in global public health, drug development, lifestyle medicine, and the field of bioethics. As she underwent medical training, Dr. Shah learned more about the health benefits of a whole foods plant-based diet, and has herself been committed to a vegan diet for 30 years as a more full expression of Jain nonviolence. She is trained as a climate realities leader and has co-authored the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis and written the climate-focused Jain Ritual of Repentance. She's also a board member of Love and Arms Farmed Animal Sanctuary. Welcome, Dr. Shah.
Thank you so much, Professor Donaldson, and all the attendees and panelists. It's really a pleasure to be part of this webinar. And it's especially a delight to participate in this session with all of you and Miyoko Schinner, whose entrepreneurial and philanthropic activities have done so much to promote ahimsa, the pillar of Jain ethics. As an example of our teaching, and in addition to what Dr. Donaldson has shared, I'd like to add a sutra from the Bhagavad Gita. Anati anudo appam, ayasado anunayam nati, jahataha jana mahalam, anavayam ahimsamam ati. There is nothing so small and subtle as the atom, nor any element so vast as space. In the same way, there is no quality of soul more subtle than ahimsa, harmlessness, and no virtue of spirit greater than reverence for all life. This is really what motivates us as Jains. And in our tradition, there's a taxonomy of beings categorized by the number of senses. Householders are prohibited from harming mobile living beings with 2 to 5 senses. Our traditional practice of ahimsa is expressed in lacto-vegetarianism, avoidance of meat and eggs, but including milk, and also in practicing other dietary rules, such as avoiding eating at night and avoiding the consumption of root vegetables. A growing number of us are also recognizing that a whole foods plant-based or vegan diet is not only most consistent with our compassion for animals, but also promotes our health and is also a key part, perhaps the most effective individual action to help solve the climate crisis. Our community has known about veganism for decades. I have been vegan for 30 years, having been introduced to the process of dairy production at a New Jersey Animal Rights Alliance convention that was hosted at Siddhachalam, a Jain ashram in New Jersey, during the time when Acharya Sushil Muni was alive. He's one of the 2 main spiritual teachers that brought Jainism to the US. And the other one, Gurudev Chittabhanu, and his wife, Pramodabhen Chittabhanu, are also very effective advocates for veganism among the Jain community. There were education talks and a vegan option in our biennial Jaina conventions since at least the 1990s. And many organizations have embraced Jain veganism. The Young Jains in the UK and the Shri Digambar Jain Association groups decided to go vegan sometime around 2015, 2016, maybe a little earlier. More recently, the Jain Center of Southern California decided to go vegan and have since 2018 served Jain vegan meals. Many individuals have moved towards veganism, influenced by the vegan options at Jain vegan organizational meals, like the Young Jains of America, but also by what's happening in the larger society. They're influenced by media, by movies like Cowspiracy and The Game Changers. And their transition has been made in no small part easier by the availability of options such as Miyoko's cheese and Miyoko's butter and so many other plant-based options. For some, the health benefits of the whole foods, plant-based or vegan diet has been a big deciding factor in making a transition as well. Our community is at particularly high risk of having heart disease and diabetes, and these are diseases that are amenable to the important effects of a whole foods plant-based diet. So I was really also fortunate enough to attend some events in the Bay Area with Miyoko Schinner, and the availability of products in the US has made it easier for many of us, but the way that she has promoted vegan transitional foods has not been limited to North America or other places that carry her items. I attended a demonstration at the PETA Foundation office in Oakland, California years ago, where Miyoko Schinner taught the attendees how to make cultured cashew cheese. And when my husband and I lived in India for a year in 2015, away from all of the ready options that we have in North America, and there was very limited amounts available in India at that time, I was able to make cashew cheese using just a base of cashews and a readily available grain. Friends in India were awed, but now in India, as well as in the US, the trend towards making more plant-based products has only increased. So I look forward with the rest of the audience and panelists to hearing more about the experiences that Miyoko Schinner will share with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shah. And now we're going to move on to our speaker. Miyoko Schinner is founder and CEO of Miyoko's Creamery, a California-based food company specializing in dairy-free products, including butter and cheeses. Recognized by the United Nations as a vegan revolutionary in its The Future of Women Global Initiative, Schinner is leading the creation of the animal-free plant dairy food system, making fermented cheeses and cultured butter from plants that rival animal dairy products at a world-changing scale. Miyoko's Creamery products can be found in over 19,000 stores in the US. They're distributed in Canada, South Africa, Australia, and Singapore. In August 2021, just a few months ago, Miyoko's Creamery won a landmark victory in the state of California to use the words butter, cheese, and cruelty-free on her plant-based products. Backed by the Animal Legal Defense Fund, Miyoko's legal victory is significant, considering the similar lawsuits have been filed in approximately half of US states by meat and dairy lobbyists to prevent plant-based competitors from using these recognizable names on their products. These lawsuits have typically been brought on the basis of consumer protection. For example, that consumers might be misled by certain terms, maybe confusing a veggie burger with an animal-based burger, or almond, soy, oat, or coconut milk with milk from cows. In her talk today, Ms. Schinner will help us understand the context of her legal victory and its significance for the future of our food system. As we begin, please note that you can click on the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. You'll see an icon there. And you can type in a question as it comes to mind throughout the presentation. Dr. Michelle Goodwin from the UCI School of Law will moderate our discussion after the presentation and field as many questions as possible regarding the legal and the social implications of this court decision. Miyoko Schinner, welcome to UCI.
I'm unable to bring up my video.
We'll just pause for a second there, Miyoko, and Dwayne will help to solve this.
Okay. Okay, the coast. Okay, let me see if this works now. Okay, there we are.
There
well,
you
hello,
are.
everybody. And
Welcome.
thank you so much, Doctors Donaldson, Shaw, and Goodwin. It's a little intimidating being in this crowd of brilliant minds, but I will do my best. So thank you for inviting me to speak to all of you about my experiences. I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. And I'm going to need someone to let me know whether you can see it or not. What do you see?
It's there, but you're about 10 slides into the presentation.
Okay. Okay.
There,
do you see it?
there
Do you
you
see it now? And that's all you see right now?
Yep. Now
Okay,
you
great.
can. Good.
Sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to get started. Yes, we are going to explore this legal victory that we recently had, but I'm going to start out with this slide right here. Okay, it's not moving. Sorry about that. I'm having technical challenges all of a sudden. We did this earlier and there we go. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
All right, grass milk. What is grass milk? Is it made from grass? Has the dairy industry figured out how to get white dairy goodness out of green grass? Or make cheese out of grass? Just grass to milk? Is this any clearer than almond milk or cashew cheese? I want you to keep this picture in mind as we think about the nomenclature around these so-called disruptive foods that are upsetting the incumbent industry. But before we do that, I want to spend a few minutes sharing my own journey that started when I was much younger, about 4 decades ago, when I was in school studying philosophy. So in my late teens and early 20s, I suffered, shall we say, from the meaning of life syndrome. I wasn't interested in learning a profession in college. I wasn't concerned about what I was going to do after I graduated. For me, it was pondering the question, why are we here? What is the meaning to life? I discoursed this through books and classes and long conversations with friends and professors. I had no idea what I was actually going to do with my life, how I was going to fill my time upon graduating. And for me, you know, I was studying mostly Western philosophy, so Plato, Aristotle, etc., although I had been raised a Buddhist. And I felt that eventually I would become busy with life, as you know. That's what happens to all of us. Life gets in the way of all of our pursuits, even those of us who are trying to uncover its meaning. And I was trying to get as much knowledge as I could or understanding about the meaning of life while I was in college. So my life meandered on through various businesses, boyfriends, marriages, raising a family. And by the time I was in my 40s, I began to think that my pursuit of the meaning of life was just a juvenile fantasy. It was really only after the 5th decade of my life that I began to get a taste of perhaps the real question that I should have been asking, or how it was going to the answer was going to reveal itself to me. What I realized was that the knowledge or the understanding of the meaning of life becomes revealed when we take action by living philosophically, not by just pondering it. This is perhaps where Eastern philosophy probably has a little bit of a head start from Western philosophy or religion. We have to live our philosophy when the classroom ends. We have to act. We have to take action. Action is what ultimately defines us. Action is how we ultimately understand the meaning of life, the meaning of our life, understand why we are here. Now, it doesn't end with the university walls through simply reading Plato or Kant or Hegel in some theoretical way. The meaning of life is about how we live our lives, how we put our beliefs into action, how we show up, how we take action to stand up for our beliefs. The meaning of life is revealed in our own evolution as a human being, both individually and collectively. We're at a turning point in human history when we have an opportunity to act in a way we have never, ever have. It's an opportunity for every single human being in privileged parts of the world, I have to stress, to think about how can we design the future to be more equitable? And I'm talking primarily about the food system. We can chatter and banter on social media all we want, but it's meaningless unless we put our words into action. Today, we all talk about food everywhere. It's all over social media and everyone's got an opinion. But we talk about it as if it's our fundamental right to enjoy whatever it is we want to eat. But with every right comes a responsibility. Food is a fundamental responsibility, and that's where the action comes in. The responsibility for others that comes as a result of our rights because, well, let's just think about it. Meat. An average American eats 144 pounds of meat per year. And if everybody wants to eat that way, what do you think we're going to have to do? 41% of the entire nation is occupied by animal agriculture. The only way we're going to be able to scale, we talk about animal welfare, we'll have to throw that out the window. We're going to have to pack billions of more animals in factory farms. We're going to have to burn the Amazon so we can grow corn and soy to feed them. We're going to have to displace native peoples, decimate wildlife, possibly leading to extinction, saying nothing of the fact that, we're just killing billions of the animals themselves that we're eating. We're going to destroy our mother planet. And if, SpaceX doesn't save us, then I don't know where we're going to live. So this is where our responsibility comes in. While eating that steak may be our right, we really have to ask, what is the meaning of this? How much is it really worth? What we eat has an impact that's far beyond our own health. It impacts climate change, whether or not wildlife survives, whether or not people live or die. It impacts the health of the planet. We're finally at an inflection point where we can choose to do something about it. For the first time in human history, we've reached a point where we can choose what we eat. We don't simply have to eat what we find around us, as we have for most of history. We can choose not to participate in this destructive food system. We can choose not to harm animals. We can choose to protect them. And when we do that, we will save everything. We'll save our own health, we'll save people, and we'll save the planet. This is called activism, and this is the point of my speech today. I'm going to share you the story of Miyoko's Creamery, the company that I founded, which has activism built into it as its DNA. So here's my story. I have been a vegan for 35 years, and from the very, very beginning, I have been fighting to change the food system through food, through trying to reach people's hearts and minds through their stomachs. This is what I call Epicurean activism. I'm an activist. I also have a farmed animal sanctuary. This is Angel the cow. And this is another way I try to show people, I try to connect them with individual animals who can change their hearts as well. I've written cookbooks as another way to try, a gentle way to try to get people to try a new way of cooking, a new way of dining, so that they too can say, wow, if I can make this, maybe I'll go vegan. This is also activism. I did a cooking show that ran on PBS for 3 seasons. This is also activism. Activism represents itself in many, many different ways. And if you're just an individual who's not out there with a picketing against fur or something, and for you, what comes from your heart is baking some delicious vegan brownies and taking it to your neighbor, that too is activism. Activism manifests itself in so many different ways, and every individual on this planet who cares has an opportunity to be an activist. And it is not something that necessarily has to offend or put people off. It's an activity that can invite people to join in a compassionate journey that can be better for everybody and everything. So I'm going to take you way back to when I first started in the Wayback Machine. Back in the 1990s, I had another business making alternative meats. And this is where we're going to start talking about language, because when I started this company, I had these products and everything was I was always talking about what it wasn't. It wasn't turkey, it was unturkey. That was my leading product. We were actually the second biggest turkey alternative in the country after Tofurkey. They had the better name. We also had something called Hip Whip, which was, we didn't say but everything else was ribs, steakout. I was afraid to say what it was. And I had to tell people, I had to try to figure out in terms of language, how do I let people know this is a steak alternative, but it's not steak. And this is the beginning of this whole revolution of creating foods that are familiar to people in terms of occasions of use, what it tastes like, etc. But it's not the thing that you're substituting for. And trying to figure out how to express that was a challenge. So language evolves, and we need to learn how to evolve the language. I learned that talking about was not effective. So in the beginning was the word, and the word was cheese. In 2012, I wrote a cookbook called Artisan Vegan Cheese, which was, I like to say it was the book that launched 1,000 vegan cheese companies. Prior to writing this book, there was not a lot of vegan cheese in the marketplace that were made from fermenting plant milk. So this was sort of the primer on how to do that. And what I wanted to do was to help people do it in their own homes. I didn't want to go into business. I just wanted to show people how to make it at home. But the book was very, very popular, and people kept saying, can't you just start a business? So eventually I did. In 2014, I started Miyoko's Kitchen, making artisanal vegan cheeses as a proof of concept to show people that vegan cheese could truly be fantastic, that it wasn't just oil and starch and full of sort of artificial flavors. I wanted to show people that through artistry, through craft, that you could design beautiful cheeses. And that was my goal. We were going to be very, very small, have a retail shop, but it blew up very, very quickly. In the beginning, I had 4 employees, quickly grew to 20, and I was on the floor, scooping, schlepping, sweeping, sweating. I was making the cheese myself. Today, we are in over 20,000 stores across the United States, and even more in Canada and other places as well. So this brings us to the question of language. Is it cheese? I think you all know this quote, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet," from Romeo and Juliet. So how important is nomenclature to a product, to a thing? In the very beginning, in 2014, I was going to call our products vegan cheese. And I had a box design in California. California had to come down and it was the CDPH at the time, California Department of Public Health. They came down to inspect the facility to make sure we were good to go, and they wanted to see the packaging. So I showed them the package, and it said, handcrafted in California, vegan cheese. And they said, you can't call it cheese. And I said, well, why can't I call it cheese? And they said, because cheese has to come from milk, and you're not making it from milk. So they said, so what are you going to call it? And I scrambled, and I said, a cultured nut product. This was literally happening right there on the spot. I had no time to think about it. And they said, fine, cultured nut product, approved. So I printed out all these boxes that had cultured nut product on them. And I became, instead of the big cheese, the big cultured nut product. Okay, so, I mean, it's a little complicated. How do you sell cultured nut product? Imagine going to a cocktail party and someone says, well, what do? You say, oh, I have a company, I make cultured nut product. Or let's say you're going into a grocery store, you're looking for Miyoko's vegan cheese, and you go in and you ask the information desk, by the way, where do you sell the cultured nut products? What does cultured nut product mean? It doesn't mean anything to anybody. Imagine trying to market a food like this that had never existed before, that has a name that's unrecognizable. Does this not present an obstacle to a burgeoning new industry, to innovation? It didn't seem right. There was not a level playing field. So we decided, as we grew as a company, we decided to get bolder. We decided we're going to rethink this entirely. We're going to think about, what is the future of dairy? How are we going to talk about it? How can we redefine it? How do we revolutionize the dairy industry? So we put our thinking caps together, and we decided that we were going to reclassify dairy as having 2 forks. One would be the traditional dairy that people know, animal dairy, and the second one would be plant dairy. So we decided not to call ourselves a dairy alternative. We decided not to call ourselves non-dairy, and we removed all of that terminology from our packaging. Instead, we decided we're going to redefine it, and we're going to own it, and we're going to use proactive phrases. So we are now plant dairy or vegan cheese or cashew milk cheese or cashew milk butter. But we do not put on our packaging non-dairy. We might say does not contain animal dairy, but we try to use positive terminology that tries to redefine terminology and create change. So we decided, we redesigned all of our packaging and we decided to just call it like it is, period. So our cream cheese became cream cheese, not cream cheese alternative. Our cheddar became our farmhouse cheddar, not cheddar-like flavor or cheddar alternative. Mozzarella, we used to call it vegan mozz, and we decided, you know what? It's cashew milk mozz, because all of these products are made out of cashew milk. We start out with cashews, we make a milk out of it, we ferment the milk with traditional dairy cultures, and we follow a very similar trajectory in the actual cheese making and butter making process. So we decided, you know, we're just going to call it mozzarella, we're just going to call it butter, etc. So that's what we did. We redesigned all of our packaging to reflect what we believe these products were. So then what happened? And here's our butter. This is the butter that sort of got us in trouble, but gave us a huge victory. Okay, well, around this time, all sorts of things were happening. Articles were being written all over the place about this new revolution, this new trend of fake butter proliferation. The first thing that happened to us was that we got a class action lawsuit filed in the state of New York, so purportedly by a woman who was fooled by our butter, apparently bought our butter, thought it was dairy, and then found out it wasn't. And it was actually a bogus class action lawsuit. The happy thing about that lawsuit, it was amicably settled in a way that actually helped animals. So I'm not allowed to reveal the details of that, but as it turns out, as we began to speak to the attorney who was representing that, we found out he was an animal lover. And we were able to reach an understanding that was actually wonderful. So that went away. The next thing that happened was we got a call from Whole Foods in Wisconsin saying, hey, the state's coming down here and removing your butter off of shelves and telling us we can't sell it anymore. We called the state of Wisconsin and we found that there had been customer complaints about confusion about our butter product. Now, let me tell you that our butter SKU, our European style culture vegan butter, is the single best-selling single SKU in the natural channel. So we're talking about Whole Foods and natural stores. So it outperforms any other single product. Do you think that might have had anything to do with it? There were also articles in a magazine called Milkweed Magazine about our deception, etc. So I had to hire an attorney and we had to find out about what to do about this, because stores were pulling our products off of shelves all over Wisconsin and we were losing sales. So we had to address this. The attorney, after several months, was able to get information from the state of Wisconsin, and we were able to procure the letters of complaint. And it turned out there were two letters. One was from the Wisconsin Dairy Lobby, and the other one was from the magazine I cited earlier called Milkweed Magazine. Well, what happened was by then, we had gotten enough press that Wisconsin actually started to get real complaints from consumers who were complaining that they couldn't find our products on the shelf. And so Wisconsin finally just said, you know what, fine, we're dropping this. This is embarrassing. And they just let it go. And we were back on shelves. So then what happened? In December of 2019, we got this letter that led to this lawsuit. The California Department of Food and Agriculture sent us a letter telling us that we had to remove the word butter from our packaging because it was contrary to the FDA standards of identity, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is referenced here. It's our 21 CFR that provides the usual name of a food, and it defines dairy in a certain way. We'll talk about that in a minute. It also told us that we had to remove images of animal agriculture, including the image of a woman hugging a cow with other cows grazing in the background. And we had to remove 100% dairy and cruelty-free. Dairy images or associating the product with such activities cannot be used on the advertising of products which resemble milk products. So that is apparently a law they claimed. So in other words, the dairy industry was claiming that they had rights to the images of cows, etc. This is the image that we were told to remove from the website. This is Angel the cow. You saw her earlier in my activist photo. And this is a volunteer at Rancho Compasión, the farm to animal sanctuary. Angel was rescued from the dairy industry when she was a calf raised in one of those isolation hutches. And she is now living the good life at Rancho Compasión. Also, the so-called cow in the background is actually a goat. What we're trying to do at Rancho Compasión and what I'm trying to do at Miyoko's is to change people's perception towards animals. I want people to look at animals not as food or as commodities. I want them to look at animals as loving, living beings that deserve a life of their own. And when you show love to an animal, they return it. As you can see, Angel is in heaven being caressed by Grace, the volunteer. This is our mission at Miyoko's, to promote this concept that animals are not food. They are deserving of life that is in line with the Jain philosophy. And everything that we're trying to do to provide foods that can substitute for animal-based foods everything that we're trying to do is an effort to change people's perception towards animals. And we think it's so important to show images of animals outside of their usual agricultural image, but in images where they're relating to humans and other species to show the emotive potential of animals. Okay, so how did this all begin? Why did it all begin? Well, back in 1906, there was something called the Pure Food and Drug Act that was passed on the same day as the Meat Inspection Act. And the Meat Inspection Act was passed largely, historians agree, on the basis of a novel, The Jungle, that was published, that revealed what happened in meatpacking plants and slaughterhouses. And it turns out that there was a significant decline in meat consumption. So they actually had to pass a law to try to assure the American public that meat was safe and good for you. It turned out that the government didn't have actual authority to enforce these standards. So in 1938, they passed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, establishing about 300 standards of identity that defined what a food was or wasn't. For example, there was something called bread spread, spelled BRED SPRED. And that was supposed to be like a jam substitute, but it contained 20% coal tar. So there were some actual issues with foods that were being created by people, and regulation of some of of what was happening because of industrialization was necessary because there were some unsafe foods out there. So according to the standards of identity, milk is defined as the lacteal secretion, practically free of colostrum, obtained by the complete milking of one or more healthy cows. According to the standards of identity as they are written today, goat's milk cannot even be called milk. They didn't think far enough. There is now a new bill in Congress where they're trying to include make it all mammalian milk, not just cow's milk. And I think this is because there is pressure because of all the plant-based milks that are in the marketplace. Now they're trying to be more inclusive of all mammals, not just cows. So this is what the CDFA was saying is that, hey, you don't meet the standards of identity because your butter isn't made from milk. Okay, so what does an activist do when they get a letter like this? I knew from having been on the board of the Plant-Based Foods Association and talking to many other vegan and plant-based companies in California that we were not the first company to get a letter like that. There were other companies also that had received similar letters. And what they had done was simply comply. They had decided they didn't want to take a risk. Likely it was their board, didn't want to get embroiled in a lawsuit or whatever. And so they simply complied, changed their packaging, and took off terminology like butter. They would say butter substitute or or buttery spread or something like that. But remember, Miyoko's is an activist company. So what we did was we sued the state of California on violating our First Amendment rights to free speech. We partnered with the Animal Legal Defense Fund and Gupta Wessler, and we sued the state of California. And what happened in August of 2021 was that we won in a US district court. We won this battle. One of the reasons we won is because there was a study that the CDFA had done, a survey to find out whether or not there was indeed consumer confusion. And what they said was that, well, only 74% of consumers got it right when they talked about plant-based cheese. What the judge said was, yeah, but only 81% got it right when they talked about dairy cheese. So apparently there's confusion among a certain percentage of the population, whether it's plant-based cheese or dairy cheese. Some people will not know what those products are made out of. This was found not to be a significant difference, and therefore the CDFA did not prove their case. So I want to talk about language for a minute. I'm going to compare these two books, The Divine Comedy by Dante, written in the 13th century, and Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written about the same time. And language reflects customs. What's interesting about this is if you try to read Chaucer today, you wouldn't be able to read it. You need a translation because it's written in Old English. English is a spoken language, and so it has reflected the changing customs throughout the last several hundred years. What we speak is very different. Dante, on the other hand, wrote in what was called at the time Fiorentino. That was a dialect spoken only in Florence. It was not Italian. In fact, 80% of the Italian population didn't speak Italian until the 1980s. Everyone spoke dialects. So Italian is a relatively new language, believe it or not. And therefore, you can read Dante today and still understand it because language in Italy, Italian language hasn't evolved that much because it did not reflect customs. It was simply a written language. What's interesting is that in the last 50 or so years, Italian has changed more now than it has in the last 800. We must realize that language reflects customs. When customs change, language also must change. We're not only changing the food system today with new foods that the world's never seen, both made from plants as well as things that are attempting to be made from, cellular agriculture or so what, or what. We will have to think about how we talk about these foods. Language about food will change. So when we speak about steak in 50 years, no one's going to imagine that at one time it came from an animal. It's very possible in 50 years, cheese, butter, steak, hamburger. We'll just think that it always came from plants. We have to find new pathways to create these products from plants so that people generations from now will think that, wow, it's rather odd that one time it was made from mammalian secretions. We are at a turning point in American history. There was the Industrial Revolution. There was the digital revolution, and today we are in the midst of the food revolution. This is the beginning of a new tomorrow, and we have an opportunity to drive how we change it, how we define it, what foods we eat, and whether or not we save the planet, ourselves, and the animals. This is our moment in the sun for every single person, every single consumer. Look at all of the products that exist just in the milk map. In 2014, this wasn't here. In 2012, when I wrote the book, all of these products didn't exist. This is the future. We must believe in it, and we must redefine how we talk about foods. It's in our hands, it's in our hearts, and it belongs to the animals. Language, I want to just say one more thing before I finish. An animal-free future is something that everybody is talking about today. And I want to give a warning. Watch your words, because it isn't about creating a future that's free of animals. It's creating a future where we change people's perception towards animals and create an opportunity for animals to a just, equitable, wonderful, peaceful, loving place on this planet where we can not only just coexist, but share lives together. And together we can create a new future. Thank you very much.
Miyoko, that was absolutely wonderful. And it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Michelle Goodwin, a Chancellor's Professor at the
Dr. Goodwin, I'll be
Yes.
happy to introduce you.
Oh, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, we'll give you one less thing to do. Oh, everyone, thank you so much. And Miyoko, thank you for this really timely presentation. Wherever you are, please join me in thanking Miyoko Schinner for this firsthand account, both of her personal journey into business, but also regarding this significant legal decision related to alternatives to animal agriculture. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Michelle Bratcher Goodwin is Chancellor's Professor at UCI and the founding director of the Center for Biotechnology and Global Health Policy. Professor Goodwin's constitutional law scholarship, including several books and articles, addresses legal questions related to freedom of speech, religious exercise, equal protection, due process, race and sex discrimination, reproductive rights, slavery, and LGBTQ equality. She's credited with helping to establish and shape the health law field and establish the first law center focused on race and bioethics. Please continue to enter your questions into the Q&A, and Dr. Goodwin will field as many of these as possible. Over to you, Michelle.
Very much for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Miyoko, this evening, and particularly given the importance of the intersections that you connected, concern and welfare for our planet, for animals, activism, language and nomenclature in this space, standing up and making a First Amendment argument in this space. What is a particular thing, that and so much more we all got from your lecture. There are questions in the Q&A and even more in the Q&A. People have just said how much they had enjoyed your presentation and how inspired they are by you. I want to start off by asking you about the personal cost of being an activist in this space, because you spoke to us this evening as an activist, as a business leader, but you're a woman forging the path in this particular space. What were the costs to you personally in doing what you've accomplished?
Thank you for that question. You know, I'm a woman who's getting older, and I think I've gotten stronger. I always tell people that, I tell my daughters who are in their 20s that, you know, our emotional and mental muscles get stronger as we get older, and we become more better equipped to fight and to stand up for our beliefs in a way that, you know, when we're young, sometimes we're a little shy or we're a little afraid. So, you know, there's a lot of important work to do. So I can't be worried about, do I have a target on my back? Because the planet is running out of time. Animals are running out of time. And if I have an opportunity to do something, then that's my responsibility. So that's how I think about it. I'm surrounded. I can't do this by myself. I have a wonderful family. I've got daughters that are also activists in their 20s. I'm surrounded by a team here at Miyoko's, many of whom, not everyone, but many of whom here are also activists. I have a board that supported me when we wanted to go after the CDFA. The board was in 100% in alignment, which is rare. You don't find that. So what I'm finding across the industry is that people are waking up and realizing that they have to use not only their time, but they have to use their money for good. Across the investor spectrum, across industry, people are waking up that they must act. And I think consumers and people are looking for leadership among industry leaders. They don't want to just buy the cheapest product in the marketplace. What they want to do is support companies and leaders that are speaking the truth, that are trying to make a difference, that are authentic. They're not just doing it just because it's the cool thing to do. And so I found that it resonates more. And yes, there's been nasty things written about me in local papers by the head of the Sonoma County Farm Association. And I've seen, things, not nice things written in other newspapers, et cetera. But you know what? It doesn't matter. you have to be polarizing to get something done at some point. You can't just try to be nice, and because we're running out of time. The earth is demanding it. The animals are demanding it.
Thank you so much for that, because I think sometimes that I'm sure that's really inspirational for many of the people who are viewing today, and for young people who are thinking about, well, what does it take to be an activist, and what does it take to do something when no one else has done it before? I mean, before you began doing this, there were other people who had alternatives, right, to dairy-based products, and oftentimes they just folded, just as you said. And you somehow said, well, no, I'm going to use this muscle, this mental muscle, another muscle, and get it together and have a board that backs me. And we are going to challenge based on law. So whose idea was it to say, well, we'll use the First Amendment because this is an attack on our First Amendment rights, saying that we can't use certain words?
Sure, of course, I consulted legal counsel, Michelle Simon, who at the time was executive director of the Plant-Based Foods Association, was instrumental. And she connected me with Animal Legal Defense Fund. And we had a conversation, and we decided this was the best course of action to take. But, you know, we knew it was going to happen, and we were prepared, and we had already talked about it.
I love that. Well, I'm going to turn to a question in the queue and intersperse them with my questions, because quite honestly, I look forward to the time where we're sitting around a fireplace and we're just having a nice retreat talking about all of the amazing work that you've done, and also about food, and hopefully eating some of your foods too. We have a question in the Q&A, and it's, what's your view on GMO plant-based meat?
GMO plant-based meat, in other words, non-organic plant-based meat, or do you
Perhaps
mean?
they didn't specify.
Okay. You know, this, I'm not a fan of GMO, but that's, you know, I don't know what that means exactly. For example, precision fermentation is, so we're not just talking about health. I think when we talk about the future of food, we have to think holistically. How does it impact all stakeholders? People, the workers, the consumers, the planet, and the animals. And oftentimes we're only thinking about solutions for getting animals out of the food system. And as long as we can get animals out, it's okay. And I think we have to also think about, what sorts of companies are we going to be creating? What's going to happen to the farmers? You know, one of the things that irks me is the Locavore movement, which is a very privileged viewpoint, because many people in many parts of the world where in an underserved community was not even a grocery store, there's no opportunity to be a locavore, for example. But you could have a community garden. And I don't want to, obviously I'm not promoting meat, but because of government subsidies, sometimes the cheapest meats for certain people happen to be the worst foods in the world. The opportunity, however, for something like cell-based, or I don't know if that's what you mean by GMO plant-based or precision fermentation, is that these technologies require a lot of money. They require millions and millions and millions of dollars. So if you're a farmer who was a dairy farmer, for example, or you're just growing vegetables, or you're making plant-based meats in a very, like in a kitchen like Seitan or something like that, it's going to be very, very hard to compete with a multi-million-dollar company that's making cellular agriculture. If we're trying to create a more equitable food system where there are more people that can participate as producers, as stakeholders, I do worry about consolidation, because there was a time when there were mom and pop stores everywhere, and everything got rolled up. Farmers also, the farmer Joe had 10 cows and he delivered milk to his neighborhood. And today, Farmer Joe has no control over his milk supply because he sells to the consolidator. And I do wonder, with cell-based and some of these other technologies, will we simply be swapping out the Tysons and the Smithfields for these other larger companies, or the other way around? And will there be opportunities for farmers and smaller stakeholders to get involved in the food system? So
I appreciate your answer to that. And I also appreciate the fact that you lifted up what's happening in what are being called areas that food deserts, and their terminology that now is not only food deserts, but places where people just simply are deprived of the opportunity to have local markets. And that has a devastating impact on individuals and communities that are underserved, vulnerable communities where they're predominantly people of color. And so thank you very much for lifting that up. There's another question in our Q&A from Supriya, and it's, what are your thoughts about the alternative spelling, such as milk spelled M-Y-L-K?
Yeah, I think that's fine, but it's a compromise. Like, people, when you think of milk, it's something, I mean, I would call MYLK more of a brand name, but let's just call it milk. Let's redefine what these foods are, because it's not like, all of these foods are supposed to substitute for familiar foods, because we are all creatures of habits, and we want to eat these familiar flavors. So let's just call it plant milk, plant dairy. And eventually, as plant dairy takes over animal dairy, there will no longer be animal dairy, and milk will simply be milk, and it'll always come from plants.
There's another question from Annabelle, who thanks you for being here and wants your perspective on why the climate benefits of plant-based eating seem to be obscured in big climate conversations like the one taking place globally right now.
Oh my gosh. It's really sad, because it's one of those things where food is a personal choice. At least that's what we have believed. And people are afraid of offending customs. I mean, we can change energy resources. It doesn't change cultural traditions. But if you have to all of a sudden not eat meat, what are you going to do for your 4th of July barbecue? And so it has so many different touch points, and people are very, very sensitive to it. And leaders, that's the other thing. Leaders don't want to make a choice. Luckily, we have leaders today like Eric Adams, the new mayor of New York City, who's a vegan, yay, and he's fighting for the animals. And Cory Booker, who is also fighting for the animals. So, we've got to change the powers that be at the top, and we've got to keep preaching to them as well, too, because Greta Thunberg's just screaming at the top of her lungs to all of these people, and they're not listening. But it is, there's just this entrenched idea of individual rights in this country. And we have to rethink that, because along with those rights comes heavy responsibility. And we just have to move our whole community, our whole society, to start thinking about global communal responsibility.
You are so right. In fact, what this global pandemic has revealed are underlying institutional and infrastructural inequalities. You're so absolutely right on that. We have a question from Lydia. Again, she thanks you. Folks who have participated in this Q&A, they are all adoring, enjoying, they're using the word loving what you have spoken about this evening. And Lydia writes, for good Epicurean activism, how do you suggest dealing with people who say vegan cheese doesn't taste enough like animal dairy cheese? What's your response to that? Have you heard that? You probably have.
Well, yeah, I remember, when I bought my first vegan cheese in the 90s, there was, and it was just terrible. I came home and I practically I had to spit it out of my mouth. It was so bad. And, there's still lots of not very good stuff out there. I mean, one of the things that we have to think about is most of the products in the marketplace are more akin to processed cheese. They're made of just oil and starch with natural flavors. And they don't honor the traditional art of making a milk and then fermenting it and then aging it and doing all this, the rigmarole that dairy cheese has been making. So obviously it's not going to taste the same. So I think, when someone says it doesn't taste as good, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, to some degree, the more the processed cheeses we need to figure out how to evolve the science so it gets better. If you think about it, dairy science has had 2,000 years to get it right. For us in the vegan cheese category, we've had maybe a decade or so. I mean, it's only been 9 years since I wrote my book. But there are some really great cheeses. And I can tell you that we have taken our cheeses, many people have taken our cheese wheels to parties and events, and people go, oh my God, I had no idea that it was vegan. And there are more, it's not just our products. There are more and more products out there like that. Our products are served at top wineries throughout Napa and Sonoma Valley because chefs like them, and they realize, they think that it goes with champagne or goes with a Pinot Noir, etc. So I think it is changing. And I think you just have to look for the best tasting vegan cheeses. There are so many artisanal vegan cheese producers throughout the country, throughout Europe. I visited one in Italy. I brought some cheese back. It was fantastic. They're all over the place. So all of these companies do need to learn how to commercialize them, how to scale. But you can find these amazing products online, and you can. I think our products are pretty amazing too.
Your products are pretty amazing.
So, I would beg, I think you might want to just surprise that person by putting together a beautiful vegan cheese platter of the artisanal stuff and taking it over there and say, oh yeah, I know you don't like vegan cheese, so I brought you a cheese platter, and don't tell them.
So I have a question for you. We'll go back to the Q&A after this. And you spoke about scaling. And so if you could walk us through just a little bit of that, what was it like for you when you realized, okay, I need to scale up because there's tremendous demand for my product?
Oh gosh, yeah, people think, oh my God, how did you do this? It's not a cakewalk. Let me put it that way. I went from making things in my kitchen to a 4,000 square foot facility, which we outgrew within 2 years. And it was just, we had dozens of people in there at the same time. We were all making things by hand. It was crazy. And when we built our current facility, we had to figure out how to automate. And the first few months were terribly scary. I thought I was going to lose millions of dollars of investor money because it didn't work. We bought this equipment and the cheese didn't coagulate. So that was a nightmare. I thought, oh my God, and we were selling to distributors, and our so-called fill rate, in other words, the percentage of the order we were filling got down to 13%. And I thought, I couldn't sleep. It was terrible, but we figured it out. We figured it out eventually. And that's the terrifying thing and also the exciting thing about a new technology like this is that we're figuring it out on the fly as we actually make it and sell it. So we have a lot of controls in place, of course, and we're figuring out the technology. That's the exciting piece, is that we're learning how these plant milks behave. What is the protein makeup of different plant milks? How do they behave when you introduce certain microbes or subject them to certain temperatures, et cetera? And this is like new frontier. It's like the wild, wild west. It's really exciting.
It really does seem like the place where innovation can take place when you think about it, right? As you've mentioned, 2,000 years of connectivity of dairy to cows and the last decade of really building out within this space, innovation really is here. I want to turn to a question in the chat by Iso, and Iso writes about a trend of greenwashing and humane washing in which big agriculture companies deceptively label their practices, and wonders what you think about this First Amendment space. Is this something that you and colleagues in the field look at and shake your heads, or not?
No, so the very first slide I showed you was of grass milk. I do not believe that any government agency has gone after Horizon about their grass milk. What about these happy pictures of animals, a pig on a bacon package, smiling as if he can't wait to get to the slaughterhouse, or these happy cows dancing in the field with a ballerina skirt, are these deceptive images? And the CDFA was telling us that animal agriculture, those images of animals actually did belong to animal agriculture, that they were the only ones that were allowed to use them. And they're showing them, they always show the animals as being very, very happy, as if they want to be your steak or your hamburger or your milk. Yes, it is deceptive. I don't know a single animal that wants to go to a slaughterhouse. And there's plenty of visual footage on anywhere you can find that footage. Animals are not, they know, they're very, very smart. They know when they're about to die. They know when that transport truck comes. It's painful for them. And, they know what happens to all the friends that go away. They know exactly what time it is. And so it is deceptive. But I guess the question is, do we have yet the lobbying capacity, the money to go after these large industries? I don't think anyone has actually stood up to them, but perhaps there should be a lawsuit against these companies that say, hey, you're representing your cows as being happy while they go off to slaughter. Is that indeed true? And perhaps that is a form of activism that somebody should do. I don't know if that should be a company like ours, because we're also trying to consider the farmers that are being challenged by the current animal agriculture industry, but also by the changing consumer landscape and changing tastes. And we have a farm transition program where we're trying to find a dairy farmer and help them transition to growing crops to become part of our supply chain. It's a program where we're working with nonprofits and experts and universities to help the farmer transition. And we're going to be funding their transition so they're going to have a livelihood. So we don't want to make enemies of the farmers. It's not the farmers that are doing the wrong, if that makes sense. It's the consolidators. It's these larger corporations that have consolidated animal agriculture, industrialized it, and then are painting this glorious, happy picture to the American public. And that does need to be challenged, and someone does need to stand up to them.
Well, right. When people go to markets to get the products that they use in their homes, and it appears based on a label that it's a tiny little farm and the chicken is coming straight from the tiny little farm, what you're speaking to is the fact that all of this has been consolidated.
Yes.
Even possibly that farmer, how can they even know which ones were their chickens that ended up at that store in the package that you got, right? I mean,
there is virtually no farm that is tiny. I mean, I live in agricultural land. I drive by farms every single day. I've been on these farms. I've seen it with my very eyes, and there is no Farmer Joe with a dozen cows or with a bunch of free range chicken, with 100 free range chickens. It doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't exist. And it won't exist. And as long as we keep eating meat, we're going to have to industrialize it more and more and more. That's the only way we'll be able to satisfy people's tastes. And that horrifies people because 78% of the American public is very upset by factory farming. And but the part of the humane washing is they think that, well, we'll just go to organic and everything is hunky-dory. And that isn't the case.
Well, so I'm glad that you mentioned this. So what's your take in terms of distinctions where people are thinking, well, they should shop organic, they should avoid GMOs? What's your sense, and what kind of products do you use, and what comes out of the products that you sell in the marketplace?
Okay, well, we are organic. We use only organic products. We did launch one product line last year that was just non-GMO, and we're actually discontinuing that line at the end of the year. We weren't happy with it, so we're just getting rid of it. And our commitment is to organic. But I can tell you, in terms of organic dairy, because I live in organic dairy land, it ain't always so pretty. Just because it's organic doesn't mean the cows are treated any more humanely. So here's what happens with organic. And this is something that I didn't know about until I started a farm animal sanctuary. We had a dairy cow named Erica who was injured, and I needed her to be treated by a vet. So we had the vet come out, and the vet was showing me how to give her an injection. And a cow's hide is very, very tough. And I was really struggling. And I said, hey, doc, I bet you're much better at this. You probably get practice all the time. And he goes, no, I haven't given an antibiotic to a cow in years. And I said, why not? He said, because all of the cows are organic here. We don't administer antibiotics to cows. Otherwise, they wouldn't be organic. So that's when I found out that when an animal is injured on an organic farm, they're either just euthanized because they don't serve any purpose. You're not going to spend $1,000 treating a cow, or you can't send them to slaughter anymore because now you can send them to slaughter right away, or they become conventional, but most likely they would just be sent to slaughter because you're not going to invest that money in treating the animal. So that's the truth of animal agriculture. Just organic standards just means it's organic for us. It doesn't mean that it's good for the animal. So yes, if you are going to take care of animals, at times you're going to have to administer medications for their well-being, just like for humans as well. And that's the difference between a sanctuary and a farm. A farm is about how to keep the animals healthy enough until you slaughter them. And a sanctuary is how to keep them healthy enough and happy enough for life.
One final question, then I'm turning it back over to you, Brianne. So the question is, and this is a question that's coming from the chat, the Q&A, but as well, I'm interested too, and that is, what's your sense about a new form of labeling that gets at ethical treatment on packaging? Do you see a future in that at all? Would that help to inform and educate the public? Does something like that already exist?
Ethical treatment of animals. So to me,
Unlabeling
treatment of animals would mean that you would
Mhm.
never send them off to slaughter. And every dairy cow goes to slaughter. A lot of people drink milk and eat cheese because they say, well, the animal didn't have to die for the milk. But the animal does die between the age of 4 and 6 when their milk production goes down. They're turned into hamburger, and all male cows, all male calves are sent off to slaughter or raised for veal. So the dairy industry is the meat industry. It's the same.
Mhm. And so basically your answer is there's no getting around that. I mean, what label could you possibly produce that says?
No, I mean,
that
it would
that's
sort of
ethical?
be like, I went to, when I was in Hungary, I visited what's called a transportation center. Basically, it's like a concentration camp, but a much nicer one, where Jews had a pretty good life until they went off to their slaughter. And so it's a similar thing. It's like, well, we're taking good care of you, but, and I heard a farmer say, well, I took good care of my animals and now it's my decision to kill them. And I think at some point we have to decide who owns that life. Is the life of an animal owned by the individual, but by the farmer, or is that animal entitled to self-determination? And we can also think about our own evolution, because 30, 40, 50 years ago, we treated dogs much worse than we do now. We used to tie them up in the backyard. Today, we realize that our dogs are our family members, and we've changed. And I have hope because of that humans can evolve to a point where we recognize that all animals are capable, are deserving of our love. So the animal rights movement isn't about liberating animals. It's really about liberating ourselves. It's about the human evolution. It's about us becoming human, starting as being human and going to humane. It's all about us. And when we become humane, when we have self-enlightenment and consciousness and awareness, we will change what we eat. We will treat others differently. We will treat animals differently. So it's not a fight. It's about our own evolution as a species. It's about saving ourselves.
Miyoko, I want to thank you for joining us for this conversation and giving of yourself this evening, your activism, and for forging new pathways within food communities. Thank you so much for your courage, indefatigability, and so much more in the great food products that you bring to the marketplace. Brianne, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Dr. Sulek Jain, are you there to make a comment? Give us just 1 second to see. Yeah, good, we've promoted. Dr. Jain is very active in the US and international Jain community and wanted to make one audio comment. Sulek, please go ahead.
1 second. Miyoko, I want to salute you for wonderful talk for many, many reasons. Number one, I have been vegan for the last 35 years. Of course, I was a born Jain, so I've been a vegetarian all my life. And what I see here, you are a crusader. You are changing what Jains should be doing for the 1,000 years. So you are more Jain than many of us are. And also, I would like to say, in the very beginning of your talk, you quickly said, about the resources, about the land, all of that. But one thing comes to back my mind is that as long as people will keep on eating animal-based products, there will be viruses like COVID and many of those things, they will always be around. So there are other health issues, and human beings, 5 million people have been killed just by this virus. So that also becomes very, very important. And second is that we have 150,000 Jains in North America. And our representative, Dr. Jina Shah, who spoke earlier, she is representing us. And we want you to just bank upon that resources, that we are with you. We'd like to work with you. And Brian, of course, is there always. And we need you in India.
Thank you. I'd love to go to India. I've never been there.
Yeah, India
Thank
has
you.
gone. India has gone in a wrong direction. India is the biggest producer and exporter of beef, all because of milk, because of all the dairy. So we beg you. I know I live in Las Vegas, but we beg you to take that bigger cruelty. It is not an uncruel country, okay, where I was born. So these are the comments I want to make. Thank you and appreciate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sulek, for those last thoughts. Thank you, Dr. Goodwin, for your really thoughtful and introspective moderating. And everyone, please virtually join me in thanking Miyoko Schinner, both for this candid and talk, but also in your courage in taking up this legal case. Thanks to all of you for contributing to this rich space of innovation between food and agricultural ethics, and the role of ethical innovation and law in producing thriving futures for our living planetary communities. Dwayne, if you just drop that in the chat again, the event on December 1st, it's our inaugural Jain Studies lecture at UCI featuring Anne Vallely, who will be lecturing on non-ordinary states of consciousness in the Jain tradition. And for all of you who've joined us today, look forward to a link in the next few days where you can get a video of today's presentation and share it with your friends and community. Miyoko, thank you again, and everyone, please be safe tonight, and till next time.
Thank you so much.
Jai Jinendra.